Welcome to the Forever in Their Hearts podcast with Dale Martin Jr., brought to you by Martin Brothers, providing funerals designed and customized to be as special as your loved one lost. Now, here's your host.
Yes, this is your host, Erik Reynolds. I'm here with Dale Martin Jr., president of Martin Brothers Funeral Services. And today we'll be talking with Dale about funeral traditions and deciding between having a burial versus cremation. We'll also talk about taking religious beliefs into consideration, where ashes can be scattered, and what many people decide to do today. Now, before Dale joins us, just a reminder that if you have questions or require assistance, you can reach Martin Brothers Funeral Services in Vancouver at 778-330-7799. Again, that's 778-330-7799. Now, Dale, it's great to be talking with you again today.
Erik, great to be with you.
Well, Dale, I'm looking forward to a great conversation today, so let's just go ahead and get straight to it, and let me ask you this. I'm a pretty religious guy myself, and we're talking about burial and cremation. Does cremation go against my religious beliefs?
Well, Erik, I've had many times people will ask me, they'll say, Dale, should I do cremation? Should I do burial? And it's a very personal discussion. And I always say, speak about it with your family first, like talk to your spouse or significant other, and ask that question. And it's important to take into consider many things. And one of the things I often think about is our religious beliefs. Now, as a Christian, I look through the Bible, and we even had a Bible study at our home last night, and we were talking about it. And there's nothing in the Bible that says that cremation or burial is ultimately what we should do when we've died. But throughout the Bible, precedent has been set. Christ was laid in the tomb, and throughout the Bible, you'll see that burial or entombment was always the standard throughout the Hebrew, the Old Testament, and of course the New Testament. With respect to, I think about the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, burial has sort of been the standard. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that was the precedent set forward. I think most traditional Christians, certainly the Jewish faith, they mandate burial, and that is still a very much personal choice. Your faith will guide you. Christ and God are amazing and can put us back together in whatever ultimate form we have taken after we have died. But do a little work on your own behalf. Talk to your pastor, talk to your rabbi, talk to your priest, and get a little input from them. But most importantly, talk to your family and know that whatever decision you make, it's fine. It's you that has to be comfortable with it, and certainly your family and your spouse. I even think about the Muslim world. The Muslim world is also mandated burial, not per se cremation. But the Sikh and the Hindu, cremation is certainly a part of their world. And so everybody, whatever your faith, Buddhists can be burial or cremation, but there's precedent that is set in our various faiths. And I think you take a little time to research that and go and ask those elders in your religious background what their thoughts are. But I'll come back to it again. You have to be comfortable with it. But more importantly, your family, your spouse, have to be comfortable with the decision you make.
Well, Dale, let me ask you another question about cremation. If we do, my family and myself, decide to go the route of cremation, can I have my ashes scattered at sea?
Well, Erik, great question. And one of the most wonderful services that Martin Brothers now offer is our beautiful ceremony at sea. We have our 70-foot yacht that we provide with our cremation services. We'll do the funeral, the cremation, and then afterwards we can take the family out on the boat, and we can take about 25 people. We'll go out for a tour on English Bay in Vancouver, scatter the ashes. I often will have a piper on board, and when we scatter the ashes, there can be a lament or a song that the piper might play that might be appropriate. And then we mark the GPS location where we scattered those ashes. When the boat stops at that spot, when we actually do the scattering, we actually take a picture of the GPS reading, and then I prepare a beautiful plaque with a picture of the deceased on the plaque with the GPS, and I give that to the family. And it's a lovely thing, and the reason I think it works so well is because that plaque can go on your mantle at home or somewhere in safekeeping that you can remember that loved one. It kind of acts like a permanent memorial or a headstone. And, had it been a burial at a cemetery, we'd have a headstone that we could go and visit on a significant day, a memorable day. And I like that. And there's peace of mind that goes with that. And so the answer to your question is, can I have my ashes scattered at sea? Is absolutely yes. People always say to me, well, Dale, do you need a permit? Well, actually, you don't need a permit. When you scatter ashes at sea anywhere in Canadian waters, it's completely legal. And there are some laws throughout with respect to burial of an urn or burial on private lands, but that's another discussion for another day.
Well, that kind of pings my interest, and I have another question. Can I have my ashes buried, and where?
Well, and that's exactly what I was just thinking about it for another day. Well, the day is now to talk about that. Yes, ideally what you do, if you bury that urn, you should go to a cemetery. You have to have a burial permit, and the burial permit comes automatically with your cremated remains, with your urn from the funeral director. And then you purchase a plot at one of the existing cemeteries, and you bury it in a plot, or you place it in a columbarium niche. And for those of you who are not familiar with the terminology of columbarium is just, it's usually a granite wall that has little cubicles, and we call those little cubicles niches. And they're usually a 1 foot square cube and room for you to put an urn in there. And then on the front of the niche or cubicle is a granite facing. And on that granite facing, you can put permanent marker with the name and dates and pertinent information on to mark that grave. So that niche becomes the grave for that urn, and that's very common and is available at just about all the cemeteries in the Lower Mainland.
Well, I know I'm asking a lot of questions about the cremation side of this, and let me ask one more. What about at home? Is it okay to keep the ashes and the urn of our loved one and deceased one at home with us?
Well, people always, when I make funeral arrangements with families, sometimes they're leery to make a decision about what to do with their cremated remains after the funeral has taken place. And I always tell people there are basically four options. You can keep them at home. You can scatter them in the land or the water. You can bury them, or you can leave them at the funeral home for an indefinite period of time. And I don't encourage that because it just sort of puts off the inevitable. I've got this urn, I've got to deal with it. And I try to help families to make a decision to do the disposition very shortly thereafter the funeral. I like to try to, even the day of the funeral, after the funeral service, we'll often go out to the gravesite and have the burial, or we'll go out with the boat and do the scattering of ashes, even if it's in the next day or week, because what happens is it sort of hangs over your head, and it's one of those things that needs to happen sooner than later. I think back many years ago, I was a young funeral director, and this older fellow, his wife died, and he couldn't make a decision what to do with her urn, and he left it here at the funeral home. And we're very cooperative. If people leave an urn with us for a while, we'll notify them every year or 2 years, send them a letter and just say, what your loved one's remains are here. What shall we do? Well, years went on, and he never did anything. Well, he had remarried, and then his second wife had died, and we did the same thing, and we had cremated her urn, and we had left it there. And one day I phoned him, and I said, his name isn't Bert, but I'll call him Bert for all intents and purposes. Bert, we've got your wife's ashes here, and I also have your first wife's ashes here. It was kind of upsetting for him because he really had forgotten about it, and so we took time and we looked after both of those urns. But you can see how it's something that does need to be dealt with immediately, and that's what we're experts in that. We're professionals in that field. We don't like to push people, but I like to encourage them, say, hey, listen, let's do this so it's off your plate. And you certainly don't want to have it left over for your children to deal with. It's something that needs to be done. And I only tell that story because, Eric, I think it's a story that sort of, somehow there's a little comedy in it. I think that this poor old fellow, he should have dealt with his first wife, and now he's got his second wife to deal with, and I think it should have been dealt with. And he was a friend of ours, and he's now gone, but I'll never forget looking after both of his wives at a particular point in time. But it's something that needs to be done. Look after your wishes now. so you can put it behind you, put that to rest in your mind.
Now, Dale, with the conversation, burial, cremation, it kind of got me thinking, what do most people do? Do more people get cremated or buried?
Well, Eric, that question is asked to me so often. People say, well, Dale, what is it? Well, you know what? If you think about cremation and burial, you always look to history. What does history tell us? Well, in the Western world, in the last 100 years, and I've spoke about this before, we have changed our values. And if you think about North America, for example, North America was settled in the East. The 13 colonies in the 1700s, and those 13 colonies later became the United States of America. And of course, the British kept Canada. And in Canada, we were a British settlement for all those years, and now we're our own sovereign nation of Canada. Well, we started in the East, and we slowly moved west. And then the rail line finally made it all the way across the Rocky Mountains, all the way to Vancouver. And we, as Canadians, North Americans, inhabited the plains, the mountains, and the West Coast. And what happens with that is, in the old days, all the way back to Europe and England, we had family plots, and generations upon generations of family members were buried. The Martin family, we had family plots in England, going back several generations. We came west, went to Halifax, then settled in Saskatchewan, then finally settled in southern Alberta, and we have family plots in southern Alberta. Now, now with us in Vancouver, if someone dies in our family, we don't have a family plot there yet, so we have to establish a family plot. Now, I tell that story is because our generation, the last 2 or 3 generations, have been transient. We've left our home, our motherland, and moved all the way west, and here we are in Vancouver. There are many family plots here, but people don't have the connections that they did historically. So since there's no family plot, for many families in the Lower Mainland, maybe the decision for cremation is comfortable with them. And so if you look at Vancouver, what's happened over the last 100 years, they've gone from 100% cremation all the way up until the late 50s and 60s to the 60s, where they started to have 10%, 18%, 20% cremation, then to 35% cremation, all the way to today. We sit around in the Lower Mainland at about 78% cremation, almost 80%. So 80% cremation, 20% burial. Nothing wrong with that. That's just the way our society works. And so the split is, people say to me, well, we have cremation because there's no cemetery plots. Well, there's lots of cemetery plots available. However, they're relatively expensive in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, as opposed to how expensive they might be in Saskatchewan or Alberta or anywhere. So dollars drive it, I think, and it's just about the cemetery plots. Burial makes cemetery plots are a little more expensive than what people might not be expecting. So maybe cremation is the choice. I ultimately think, though, Eric, that people choose cremation not necessarily because it might be cheaper, but I think it's just our whole society and our thinking is, well, that's an efficient, clean way to go. And I think that's fine if you think that way. But my own personal thoughts, I came into this world in one piece, and I will be buried in one piece and laid to rest myself personally. But here again, it's very personal, and it's something that you have to be comfortable with in your family, and certainly your spouse, and I always stress that. And that's my thoughts with respect to cremation versus burial.
Well, one last question let me ask you, Dale. Do you have any words of advice that could help families?
Well, I think the best advice and is to pre-plan your funeral. You can go to our website, and on our website there's a nice green button right in the center of it. It says pre-plan my funeral wishes now. You can click on it, and there's one page that asks about 10 questions that are the most critical questions that you and your spouse or family member, significant other, should answer. And you go through that, and one of the questions is, do I want to be buried? Do I want to be cremated? And then there's a spot for you to write your information and to tell a little bit of your story. What's important to you? And for me, it's important to be buried or to have a funeral in our family church. It's important to have, for me, it's important that my casket be present at the funeral. And why that's important for me is that I think when the casket is present at the funeral, many things happen. There's the level of reverence and dignity involved. There's certainly a central focus to the service, somewhat of a